Well, hello and welcome to the Alpha Anywhere demo and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software, and I'm pleased to present Dion McCormick, no relation, who will be answering your questions today as well as providing, I believe, two example sessions. One, I think, has to do with APIs. The other has to do with a question that a user had written in earlier. And remember, you can always send in your questions directly to us by sending an email to guides, Guides, at alphasoftware.com. So you can also enter them into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. So let's get started. Hey, Dan, are you there?
Yes, I am. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thanks. I'm going to go ahead and make you the presenter.
Awesome.
And there's your screen.
Excellent, excellent.
But you know what you're missing from it? Usually this thing pops up and you're front and center, and you seem to be missing.
I didn't want it to be so jarring today, but if you ask for that, I'll give it you.
There we go. All right.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you very much, everybody. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule and joining us. And today, as I'm going to actually, no API stuff day. It turns out we've got plenty on the agenda here, along with some questions people have given us. So we're going to kind of focus on those today and clear those out. As we have talked about before, we're rapidly closing in on our fabulous developers conference. In fact, it's next month. So make sure to go to alphasoftware.com, DevCon 2018, and check it out. The team is very busy right now finalizing the session content. The Meet the Doctor sessions, you name it, we're crossing, and most importantly, the training day that's also going to be available. So it's going to be a great event, and we really would like you to join us, both for your personal education, but also for you to meet other like-minded developers. We also have some really cool, outstanding customers who are going to present how they've used Alpha to solve specific business issues. So what's really neat about that is it's not just us talking. You're going to actually hear from other Alpha developers and Alpha companies who have taken both Alpha Anywhere and also now Transform and use that to actually address specific customer issues and help them develop and deploy. It's really awesome stuff. Along with that, we're going to have our developer team there. So you're going to be able to meet and spend time with the developer team asking questions one-on-one. It's really a real good time. So definitely go there. Just logistically, next week we will be having a session. I won't be actually hosting that one. Dave, our person for next week.
But it's going to be great.
It's going to be amazing.
It's really going to be great. It's a very cool sample demo that I have seen before, done by someone who has presented before at Alpha DevCon, I believe, on at least 2 sessions, maybe 3 sessions. I will get you details for that a little bit later on in the session.
Yeah, it's going to be.
Them into the chat window, but you don't need anything. You don't need to sign up for anything. If you are here today, next Wednesday's webinar will be the exact same link that you used to get into our special presentation next Wednesday. So we hope to see you there.
It is going to be awesome. I can't wait myself. It's always fun to be on the other side and checking it out because there's so many cool things. And every week we see new things people have done, and it's just absolutely fantastic. As Dave mentioned, in your GoToWebinar control panel, there's a questions area. If you have burning questions, please put those in now. We'll be reviewing them and trying to answer as many of those possible today. In fact, one of our esteemed colleagues put in a question, and we have some answers on that, and that's really going to drive today's session in terms of discussing this specific issue and some of the new capabilities that were in the that are now available in the pre-release, and I think are going to have dramatic impacts on simplifying and normalizing how people do certain tasks within the system. That's one thing that Alpha always focuses on, is taking and understanding, what are the challenges people are having, what maybe is causing to do a little bit more code, a little hand holding, etc. And then using our inbuilt technology to incorporate it in so it becomes a standard, what we would like to call as a design pattern, so that everybody else can gain the benefit of simplifying that process. And in fact, we'll be going over that today. But take the time, put it into questions right now. We'll be getting those to a little later in this session. Also, remember, you can always send emails to guides, Guides, at alphasoftware.com. And also just a reminder that we didn't have a Transform Tuesday this week, but weekly we have Transform Tuesday, which is a deep dive into the Transform technology. And that is maturing very, very rapidly. We're having a lot of fun things going on inside where we're using our own technology internally at the company and putting together our own solutions. And it's really fun, really exciting, and a lot of really cool stuff coming down the road on Transform. That is where you're going to hear about it first. And also we'll be extensively spending time explaining to people, especially people who haven't really dove into the Transform area, at the DevCon, kind of how you can use Transform to work with Alpha Anywhere to build it out and develop new and innovative solutions, and also get faster time to market, maybe reduce the amount of effort, and more importantly, create a great environment for your end clients, for your stakeholders and other people like that. So a lot of fun stuff there. So make sure to mark it on. If you're interested, you can email Dave at guides@alphasoftware.com and he can get you on the list for the Transform Tuesday. So today what we're going to do, which will be a lot of fun, is I'm going to go in and talk about a new feature. It's actually in pre-release. So as we always say in pre-release, be careful, do not use it in a production environment. I personally have virtual machines that I set up, and I'll be showing you one of my virtual machines where I can install the stuff, play with it, and I know it's not going to disrupt any of my existing projects, other pieces. You can install multiple versions of Alpha, both on the server and on the local, so different versions, but I find just by having a separate environment, that works out really, really well for me. But we're going to be talking a little bit more about that, and specifically a good design pattern. And along with us weekly, we have Sarah joining us, and Sarah will have some great links for you. So keep an eye on the chat window in regards to the content we're going to cover today, and also content that we may cover in your questions section. So with that, take the time, get in there, put in those questions so Dave will be monitoring and be able and ready to go. Oh, did I leave this in there? Oh, I forgot to take that out. I apologize, Dave. Let's move along.
I get that.
So, user profile. What we're going to talk about today is a very common design pattern. And the design pattern is you have users using your system, and you need to manage information about those people. And more importantly, that information about those people are going to drive certain behaviors in your system. And this is a common design pattern in all of these. And we've had certain methodologies on how to approach it. People have taken different ways to do it, some good, some bad, which I'm going to mention with no names, that we're going to talk about that today. But also I wanted to note that, this is important because what the team in the development team have kind of looked at this problem and said, hey, why don't we build in more things into the fabric of Alpha Anywhere to manage these things so everybody doesn't have to kind of roll their own and use different techniques. That way we get consistency. And so we're going to talk about that today. This is just an example. This is from Confluence. It's a Jira Atlassian company. And I just threw this up as an example. You have users. Users usually have, first and foremost, information about them personally, data about them, phone numbers, emails, etc. There's also security aspects that are involved with the users in terms of what their login is, their password, etc. And in Alpha, we obviously have had the security framework for some time, and the security framework takes care of the security element, which is who are you and what can you access, i.e. users and groups. And very important is we have a set of data tables in the case of the standalone server. In IIS, we actually use the ASP.NET and framework to do the security pieces there along with Alpha Cloud. But the bottom line was, here are the tables, don't mess with them. And that's one design pattern is people would go ahead and modify those security tables. And we were like, no, create a separate table to maintain that user information. And then along with that, then when the person logs in, you would grab some of this information to be used later on. We'll talk about some of those design patterns in a few minutes here. So what we want to talk about is that, everybody's kind of rolled their own, and what we're going to do is create a much more interesting and more easy to manage and and you're going to see in a few minutes, a more tightly integrated way to kind of track that user information. So first, there's core user information. Really, I'm going to change this actually to core security user information, which is basically it comes down to people have a username, and that username, it doesn't have to be an email, although A lot of people tend to use emails, but you have a username that is uniquely identifies a user in the system. And along with that is an associated password that you can give the person either through the development environment. You can actually create all this information in the development environment, or we also have a set of templates so you can do this actually within the deployed app. But that user is going to have a password, which is actually going to secure your application. So they have to have that unique combination of the username and the password to gain access to get through the security framework. Now, along with that, we also have what are called groups. Some people kind of refer to them as roles. But what groups are is basically ways to categorize the users in your system and then use the security framework to either enable or disable their accessing to different pieces. So with that, you can say, and I'll show you real quickly in a minute, that, okay, only certain groups can use this grid or this control or this field, etc. So those are the core security user information. Username, password, and groups. And that was all maintained and managed through the Alpha security system. But that doesn't cover the whole universe. You also have the situation about what about all the rest of the information? Things like their full name, their phone number, their email, but more importantly, other aspects of who the person is that will dictate how the system works. So for instance, in a multi-tenant environment, you may want to have, say, an organization ID. And this organization ID identifies that they're part of a specific organization or company. And therefore, when they're viewing data within the system, you're going to filter that data so that they only see their organization's information. And that's called multi-tenancy, where you have multiple tenants, multiple people using or organizations using the same system, but each person gets a unique experience because it's going to limit the data for them. But also maybe even, even if it's in the same organization, you may have like a department code or a region code or some other kind of code that will allow you, or more importantly, that will give you the hooks to say, okay, I know this person is allowed to see the system. They've got a username and password, they logged in. But now what can they actually do within the system that's not necessarily security, but more data focused, like even like their unique ID for showing just the records of things that they've created there. So this user information is traditionally been held in a separate table, and well, even traditionally and going forward, that's the way it is. And what we do is we use the username to link the security information with the, excuse me, with the other information. So Alpha is going to maintain your security data in the Alpha security system, whether it's in a table in the case of the old one, or if in case of IIS or Alpha Cloud in what's called a security application, where it's kind of like, it's a function. You call and you get that information. In fact, hold on for a second here. Let me go in here, bear with me. The important thing about this, and let me go ahead and do this real quick, pull this up, bookmarks, where's my context? There it is. The transform right there. Come on, wake up. Of course, we're online. There we go. So, the security system is going to take care of logging them in. Then once you log them in, you now can use the Context.Security.CurrentUser function anywhere in your application to identify who that current user is who's logged in. And that's built into the system. So once the person logs in, we're going to manage who they are, and then you'll be able to get that access to that information from then on. So the important thing is we use that username to link to this other data. So the idea is in your table, you'll have a user ID or username column in the secondary table, which is where you're going to capture all this other information, and you link the two before. And that can be, then now that you know not only who the person is, you can look up all of that other information that's associated with it. So what's really cool about that is that to a large degree, you kind of had to roll your own. You'd create your own table, and then you would then maybe when they logged in, you would go into that table, pull some data out, put it into session variables, and then use that session variable information later on. Now, what's interesting, and I'm going to diverge for just 1 minute, and we're going to come back to this in more detail, is that session variables are very, very powerful in terms of you can set them, and then as long as that person is in the system under that one session, you have them available anywhere in your application, in the code, in the grids, in the UXs, in the fields, etc. But there is a downside, which is identified one of our customers, that session variables, if you have multiple tabs open in a browser, it's possible that you could set session variables in one browser tab, assuming something's going on there. But if you go to another one, that session variable crosses over all of your tabs in your browser. It's a session. It identifies who you are, what machine you're on, and where you're coming from. And so that can cause an issue where maybe you have a multi-tenant where in one tab you want to be pretending to be one person, and in another tab you want to pretend to be another organization, and then they don't work from there. So that's the problem with session variables, is that they're not very definitive. This solution, and we'll go into this in a little more detail, resolves that issue. So what is the new feature? And again, this is in the pre-release, and I'm going to go ahead and show you that in a few moments. First and foremost, the awareness of alpha of this secondary table. Let's call it we call it the extended user security info. Could be just user info, whatever you want to call it. But alpha now has knowledge and awareness of this secondary table. It's built into the fabric of alpha. And within the system, you'll see in a few minutes, there are built-in commands and capabilities that will allow you to access that information simply. So you don't have to write a lot of code to get access to that information. It kind of becomes part of the fabric. And this will make more sense when I do the demo in the next few minutes here. Now, what's great about this is that once you've set this, it's available throughout your application. You can start using it. And it can be, most importantly, used in what are called arguments. And so you get around some of those issues of the session variable. And it's actually, that helps do it, but there's also a new feature for arguments that's really going to address that issue in terms of what we go on here. So now, what I'd like to do first is kind of show you how this is structured and oriented. It is in the current pre-release that's available. Do note that we highly recommend that you don't use pre-releases in production, that again, you test them separately before you're comfortable and move them out, because we want to be able to do that from there. By the way, that shouldn't be there. I've been copying some stuff here. Let me clean up my, right here. How embarrassing. Okay, so let me go ahead. So I'm going to jump into my alpha development environment. I'm going to go into my database, and I'm using Navicat, but you'll notice that I have a table in here. I just called it user information. In fact, you can call it anything you want. It's up to you in terms. Some people call it user profile, some people call it user information, registered users, you name it. You can name the table, whatever. And it's a pretty simple table. And actually, Alpha will help you get that table set up. But the only thing that's required in the table is a user ID column of type char of 100 that is not null and is indexed. And Alpha will actually create this for you. Then you can go in and create as many other fields for other information you want to track about this person within that table. And I think a lot of people already have these kind of tables in their system. I mean, it's just a common design pattern. So what you can do is you can retrofit your table by calling whatever that username is, user ID, and Alpha will be able to know what that is. And I'll show you how to map that in a few minutes. So you'll have a separate table, and that table is going to collect an information. And the important thing is there's going to be a user ID column that links it to the user that is going to be that username of the user. So each user of the system should have a record in this table and be able to do that. Now within Alpha, in the new pre-release, if we go to our Web Projects control panel and we go to the project properties section here, there is a new area that's been added to it. So for people who are used to it, project is where you can set up a whole bunch of information about your project. Like for instance, things like repository, the new audit table functionality, email settings, Stripe settings, also things like API keys, etc. So this is kind of a control panel that manages all your information that's going to be used by your project. But you'll see there's a new section down here called Extended User Security Info. And this is where we tell the project where we get our data, where that table is, where it can get it. So first thing it's asking us is what connection string. And so I'll go ahead and click here, and you can pick whatever connection string where you're going to point to where the database is when you're running. And remember, this connection string on the fly will be changed when you publish it. So when you have it up on the server, it could be a different, database with a different table that has that information there. Next, what we do is we have a table name here called user information. And again, you can name it anything you want. So basically within that database, I'm selecting which table is going to hold that information. And then you tell it, well, which field should hold the username. And this is very important. This is the default, but if you already have created an existing table and that table already has, say, a column called username or user_ID or user_name, then you can point to that. So you don't have to retrofit your database to use this name. You just have to tell Alpha, hey, what table in your database is this information? And most importantly, which field in that table gives me the field name? And you'll notice down here, we can actually create this table. Actually, Alpha will create this. If you give it a connection string and the name of that and a field, we'll go ahead and create that table for you if you don't already have it from that standpoint within there. So it's arbitrary the number of fields you have it in. So all we care about is that single column, but you could have 100 different fields collecting information. In fact, if we go back here, you can see for user profile information, you can see they have department information, projects they may be able to be assigned, location information, all of this kind of information you can put into here. So that all this information would then be managed within this table. And in Alpha, all we're doing is in the project settings, we're now telling Alpha where to get that information is. And so, and notice right here, it's saying, the reason for this is that the Alpha Anywhere security framework has a fixed schema and it cannot be modified. So if you have modified it, definitely look at pulling that information out, putting it into this table and retrofitting, because that's the way it goes from there, from within the system. But that's all you need to do. And now it unlocks a whole bunch of cool features within the system, which I'll show you in a moment, that allow you to reference that data but without having to write code. So traditionally, again, as I said, people, when they log in, you would write a little piece of XBasic that would take this information, store it into session variables, and have them available. And that's not necessarily needed anymore, because now that Alpha knows where that information is at, we can do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. So let me talk about an example of that. And in order to do that, I'm going to be talking about, well, let me do a quick recap. A separate new table has all the other information linked by the username. Thus, we know when the person logs in how to get that information in there. And once you've set it up at the project level, it's available throughout your system. So let's talk about something. Let's talk about arguments, because this is a great example of how this is used in the systems. And this goes to the question of how do we manage, multi-tenancy and multiple tabs and things like that. So let's talk about, I was going to say, let's not argue, but let's talk about arguments from that standpoint here. So arguments are a critical part of how you filter grids, how you do things within UXs and grids. Think of them as kind of variables that are mapped to traditionally session variables, but other types of variables like page variables, etc. They can be loaded from several sources, meaning you can set up an argument. And I'm going to go through and show you a demonstration of that in a few moments here. They are really important to use to prevent SQL injection attacks. When you use arguments, you're putting in a layer of safety and security in your app so that that people can't maliciously modify the behavior of your app by tricking it, because it takes care of making sure that the actual data that's used is proper and it makes sense for that kind of query here. And they're getting more powerful all the time. So what I'm going to show you right now is I'm going to show you a grid, and I'm going to show you an example of how I would set up an argument in that grid. And then also, more importantly, is now tie it back into the new user information table capability. So I'm going to jump over here. And by the way, if there's any kind of questions on that, make sure to put them into the questions control panel. We'll go from there. So now I'm going to go back into my development environment. I'm going to go ahead and close this here. I'm going to go ahead, and I've got my demonstration here. I'm going to go ahead and open up a customer grid here. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and let me do a working preview and show you what it looks like real quick. So I've got a grid component. And now you'll notice that it's showing, it's got the alpha scheme, and it's showing all of the people in the Northwind, all the companies in the Northwind database here. And if I go back into the design, I go to the query, you're going to see that I'm going to the customer table, but I don't have any filter here from that standpoint here. So I could put in a filter. I could say, for instance, city is equal to, and then I'll go London. Okay, so I'm putting in a fixed filter in this grid saying city, and this is just SQL. And now when I do a working preview, if I've done it correctly, you'll see we now have a subset of companies that all of these are based in England. In fact, to prove that, go back to my fields here, go here, put in the city and do a working preview, and you'll see they're all London here. Now, that's nice if you have a fixed situation, but let's say you had a problem or you had a situation where you wanted this to be dynamic, i.e., depending on the person logging in or some other variable. So there's a couple ways to do it. First, if you were using session variables, I could literally go in here and say session.city name. Now, city name would be this is a session variable, so I'm saying session.city name. I would have maybe loaded that up when the person logged in or something like that. And what will happen is this session.city name will be replaced when I run and put it in city. But that's not really the right way to do it. I mean, you can do that, and that works, but what you really want to do is use arguments, because what arguments allow you to do is kind of map variables to that. So let's go ahead and show you how that works here. So let me go into define arguments. I'm going to create a new argument. I'm going to call that city, and it's of type character. So first and foremost, one thing that's important about arguments right out of the gate is that arguments know what type they are. And if they know what type they are, when they build the SQL query, they know, oh, I'm a text, I have to put commas or apostrophes after me. I'm a date, it knows these people here. So if I go to city here, I can say the name of the argument and then the data type and how do I want to get that argument value. So I have the different things, like for instance, I could say get value from variable or always prompt for a value, but let's say I use get variable, then down here I can go to the variable and I can say city name, and the scope is a session variable. So now what's going to happen, and this is an important thing, is that I've defined an argument and I've said, when you run, I want you, when this grid loads up, the first thing you're going to do is go look for a session variable called city name. And once city name is found, session variable, I then want you to assign that to this argument city. So now what I can do is in my actual field here, I can go here, or in my code, I can say insert argument. Notice that city is showing up here. And what's going to happen is when this runs, this grid's going to load up. It's going to look at that session variable. It's going to put it into the city argument. And then in the actual filter, it's going to show you this city right here. And this is the proper way to do it, because now when Alpha runs this grid filter, it knows that, oh, city is a character, so it's going to put those little apostrophes after our single quotes around it, so it works properly from there. Now, let's say city here was something that is part of a person's user profile. In fact, let's go in here and let's do that. Let me go ahead and go to here, and I'm going to go here and just go city name, and that's a type of varchar. So I'm going to save that in my user information table. So now let's say, for instance, instead of getting a session variable traditionally, what I want to do is I want to have Alpha look up in their user information record what city they are. So let's go into define arguments again. We have our city. I'm going to go over here to the get argument value. So currently right now we're getting it from a variable, in this case session variable, but check this new thing out. Get value for current logged in user. So I'm going to select that, and then you'll notice that it changes. It's saying, okay, great, you want it, what value do you want? Now I click on here and check it out. It is showing me information, two things. One, I'm going to come back and talk about these in a moment, but you'll notice if I go back and look at, we have user ID, department ID, region ID, city name. Oh, I want city name. So what it's doing is basically saying, well, I know where your table is. I know what fields are in that table. I'll take care of going and reading that information out. In fact, I know who the user is, so I'm going to go ahead and run the query. I'm going to pull that value out, and I'm going to put in the city name right here. So it's called current user city name. So now when this runs, when the grid loads up, Alpha is going to go ahead and grab out that city name from the current user table, and it's going to assign it to this argument. And now when this argument runs, it's going to put that value in right there. So that is really nice because now you don't have to load up session variables. You don't have to worry about, did I set those session variables, what it's going on. It's going to take whoever the current logged in user is, when this loads up, it's going to automatically extract that city name for you and put it into this argument, and then you can use that argument. Now, arguments are used in different places. You can use them in your scripts. Like if I go to the server side events here, I can actually reference arguments in when I load this up. Actually, let me show you a UX control that's a little bit more obvious here. So let me go into a UX control. Excuse me. I can set arguments on a UX control here, but then in the server side events, you'll see that I'm able to grab, for instance, let me scroll over here a little bit. When this UX runs, I can actually grab the argument. So for instance, notice this little piece of code, e.arguments.find, and then you put in the name. So I can actually go here. I can come up here when this loads and I can say city name is equal to, and I'm going to call that city, and that is the argument I've defined on this UX. So what happens is when this UX loads, it's going to populate those arguments, and then that argument is available here. And if I have defined how those arguments should be populated, i.e. they should be populated, let me go back here, using this current logged in user, then what will happen is that it will take care of running to the database, finding out who the user is, doing the query, pulling that data out, and putting it in your system. So they're not only valuable and useful for grids, but also UXs. They're available wherever you want to use them from there. Now, I wanted to show you one other thing. You'll notice that the value here, I grab city name, but notice there's two defaulted ones. One is, what's the current logged in username? So now what it will do is I will actually get whatever their user ID is, and that will be the value of this argument. Or, which is really cool, it will automatically say, oh, you want this user, I'm going to go find those groups and put their groups in here. And that's really powerful when you're doing like filtering on, let's say you want to use group information to filter data in your grid. You can actually get that group information in, and then in your filter, there's a technique you can use to say, only show records that are in these groups in the database, kind of so where you say what group that record should be. So they're pretty flexible. Plus, we also have the ability to pick any of these other ones to use from there. And again, all of these are definable and you can set them up yourself. So that's an idea. So you can see now, instead of me having to worry about writing session variables, loading them up when I log in, all I have to do now is set up my table with my columns, go into Alpha, go to the project properties, and go down to the extended user security information, give it the connection string, the table, and then the field that you're using as the unique ID, i.e. the linking field between the security system and that table there. And now that unlocks all of the capabilities when I'm in creating arguments and other things like that. I can just say, oh, get the value, get the value for current logged in user, and then pick the value I want, city name, and I'm done. So that's going to save you a lot of housekeeping, a lot of little coding, a lot of weirdness. Alpha's going to take care of all that for you. And we're going to be building on this for other reasons. And there's some other functions and other things coming down the road. In fact, the initial documentation is available for this, and Sarah will be pasting that into the chat window during our process here. And there'll be much more we're going to work on this going forward. So what's really powerful about this is, again, it's a common design pattern, but now we're building it into the framework of Alpha so we can reduce the amount of code you have and make it more of a point and click exercise. Now, one other thing I wanted to show you that's involved with this, and it's not so much on the extended user security information, but a new feature in terms of arguments. As I mentioned, the most common one are prompt for a value, where the system will literally ask the person for a value that it will use for this argument, although that's not used very much on web-based solutions, but desktop maybe. The other is get value from a variable, like if you want to get it from a session variable, which you can use. You can mix and match these things depending on how you want to do it. Our new capability, which is called get value for current logged in user, but now we have even a cooler one, which is xbasic. So traditionally, so now what you can do is you can actually not only get it from that table, but you can say xbasic, and then I can go in here and say xbasic function. And what will happen is when this grid runs, it's going to say, oh, I need to fill out my argument for city. Well, how am I going to do that? Well, I'll run this xbasic function. And what's really cool about that is that in here, you can do anything you want to set that argument. So you can use a whole bunch of techniques. You can look up a web service. You could, for this argument, you could go find a web service and make a query and pull that data in. You could also do extensive analysis, of things before setting it. I mean, the sky's the limit. In fact, all the security systems available here, so you can check certain security things, etc. Bottom line is this allows you to create a very, very flexible way in which to populate those arguments without having to write a whole bunch of strange stuff in session variables and everything else. And this function, by the way, can be calling class libraries, etc., to make things very simple there. So I want to kind of expose you that the new argument functionality not only includes the new get value from current logged in user, which will probably be the predominant way you want to, because most often you're using arguments to filter or set initial values of things like that. Well, within this capability, you can set that handles it for you. In fact, let me show you something cool about that. If I go back to a UX here, and I'm going to go to a field, and this is a common design pattern. Let's say when the person logs in, let's say you have a field that says, what is the person updating the record? Well, what you can do is in the default value, you can, oh, there it is, okay. In the default value, you can actually assign that equal to argument. So notice right here, if I do equals colon in the argument name, then that's what's going to be put in there. So for instance, I could go in here and say pound equals pound city. And what it would do is it will look up that argument that was put in there, and that becomes the default value in this field. I guess fax is not where we want to put city, so let's go ahead and grab that. Let's say you wanted the city always be defaulted to the current logged in user's city, because maybe that's where they do most of their work, then that's how you would do it here. So arguments are really powerful for two reasons. Three reasons. One, it's easy to do filtering. excuse me. Filtering of grids and other things there. You can use them in your code to reference them before the grid or the UX runs. And last but not least, in default values, you can also use that argument to be able to actually populate fields beforehand. And now what's great about that is that since it's, and what's really nice about that now is that since we're using the dynamic argument, then what's great about it is it will allow you to, actually look up in that user table information here, and then automatically put those in the defaulted IDs there, or into the fields here, so you can set all those pieces from here. So it's really looking, the new features are really cool. They're design patterns that before you had to do a lot of code, but now what's nice is that we're kind of building that into there. And again, this is in the pre-release. Feel free to drop down or bring it down, play with it, experiment with it. We'll be exploring this more with some of the new capabilities this is going to allow us to have in the, excuse me, a little coughing there. And last but not least, it forms the basis for design patterns that we're going to be able to build on, because now that Alpha knows where this information is in, let me go in here, in this table, there's a lot of other cool things we can do with it in terms of just profile management and setting up automated, and it's really going to be the way to go in terms of going forward. So keep that in mind when this goes full production. You may want to look at retrofitting parts of your, removing some code and simplifying your items and making things a little simpler. It's really up to you, obviously, but we're very excited about this capability. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and turn that over to Dave and see if we have any questions regarding the new features, capabilities, and or any other questions. And then after that, I want to go back and talk about the session variable, some techniques that you can use to set up and do to address that multi-tenant kind of environment that goes with it.
Wow, we have lots of questions. So
good. That means
either they were paying attention today, which
I know.
Let's start right here at the top. Actually, I'm going to start partway in because some of them are easier than others. Here's a question. If you have an argument and the argument is expected to be character, but it receives a date instead, how does Alpha handle the error?
Interesting. Well, when you
create a big nasty SQL error, doesn't it? Just
yeah. Well, I mean, it's going to, when you set up the argument.
Mhm.
So for instance, if I set that up and I give it a date, then it's going to just treat it as a text string. The date won't be actually considered a date. If you set it up to be date, or actually the time for date time fields, then it's going to format it so that the SQL query is perfect and works really, really nicely. And that's another reason we do that, is you don't have to worry about the formatting of the date too much, because Alpha will take care of making sure it's formatted for the SQL query from there. So, but if you specify it's a character and you have a query in here that's saying, for instance, date, the date is greater than or equal to, and then the argument is cool date, and that is defined as a text, then you're going to be responsible to format that before it's put into that. The argument's just going to pass it through and say this is just text. But that's why when you do these things, you want to define your arguments and you want to specify the format. Very important, because then Alpha knows then, oh, okay, I know this is a date. I know how to format it and complete building this SQL, essentially a query or a filter, a SQL statement properly for you from there. So it really won't throw an error. You'll just see the results aren't coming back the way you thought it. So for instance, you might put in a filter here, and if this date isn't formatted correctly, you just may not have any records in your filter, or you won't have any you won't have any records in your grid, because it will say, well, I tried that filter and it didn't work properly. So that's why when you set up your arguments, make sure to set them up with the true data type that's going to be used by the SQL database, and you're able to do that from there.
Excellent. Getting into some of the more interesting, difficult questions. Someone asked, how does this relate to using a directory service such as Active Directory or LDAP or jump call or any of those?
Both are equally valid. With Active Directory integration, what's kind of cool with Alpha is that in our web security system, when it's enabled, one of the things you can do is use Active Directory. That's for companies that are using those. And the cool thing about Active Directory is it does two things. One is that it does the credentialing, meaning you put in a username, password, it calls Active Directory and says, hey, do you have, is this person valid or not? It also passes back what groups they're a member of, and also in Active Directory you can track other data, much like we do in our table here. And then that data is available in the application. So it's kind of how people have been doing it before. You would maybe put that information in session variables and then use those session variables later on to do filtering, querying, initial data setup, field defaults, etc. from there. So it's really kind of an alternative.
Features that you kind of got using directory and LDAP in the past, but if you weren't using it, then you were stuck. Unless you had something like this.
Exactly. And this is becoming kind of like a directory, capability within Alpha, so you're going to have like a directory information about that. But I think most people have implemented this already. It's just they had to kind of roll their own. Now we're just kind of pulling it into the system, which will make it a little nicer.
All right. This next one is a cool question.
All right.
How would I get a list of users who are currently logged in? Like, let's say you want to be an admin and say, oh, look, I've got 15 active sessions going on.
Man. God, I just saw something on that. Before there was a trick, by the way, in the old school days, there was a trick where all the sessions, you could track the sessions by looking at a certain folder on the server and things like that, but that doesn't really work in the IIS /. Well, one way is when you log them in, you kind of create a session variable and you add them to that session variable, and then when they log out or time out, you delete them from that. But that's kind of your own manual way. I'm going to have to research that. I'm not sure if I know of a way.
Let's take a look. That would be a cool thing to do, to be able to log into and say, hey, look, the following 15 people are online with unexpired sessions, and then
Exactly.
Especially if you were going to take the system down for maintenance, it would probably be a nice thing to know if there are active users on it.
Indeed,
So,
yeah. So I'd
cool.
have to say I don't know that off the top of my head, but we will look into that and find out.
Great. Now back to arguments, if that's okay with you.
Oh yeah,
Can
yeah.
you use multiple fields in an argument? For example, they want to use both the company and the vessel. Sounds very nautical, but so they want to filter based on two things. How would you do that?
Okay, run that me. I'm sorry.
Sure. So for example, we said we would like to filter on city. But what
Okay.
if we wanted
Yep.
to filter on city and last name, like only, Smiths from London or something like that?
Oh, okay. Well, this filter criteria can be as so you can sit there and just say, so let's go ahead and say city is equal to, and then I'm going to just use my argument. So it's going to grab my current user's city and, um, you know, um, um, you know,
Last name equals, and if you had like a argument for last name, it would look like
yeah.
that. Okay.
So I'd have to have a last name there. And what I would
Mhm.
do is in my arguments, I would go ahead and add a new argument called last name. It's type character. And I'll get it from there and I'll get it from there and say maybe this is like that's their last name. And now when this loads up, it's going to read out of there the city and there. But I can mix and match these. So for instance, let's say they set the city during the process. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say get value from a variable. Oops, no, I want that one to be the correct city name. I want this one to get the value from a variable, and I'm going to add a variable, and it's going to be, you know, session variable last name or whatever, whatever it happens to be. So
Mhm.
now I've got, this is coming out of that table. This is coming out of a session variable. I can now go in here, and then this is going to grab from the table. This is going to grab from session. So it's maybe something they selected when they went in, or you set like which project are they on, and so that everything is limited to that one
Oh,
project when they
sure.
log
Yeah,
in.
yeah. Hmm.
Things like that. That's where I see this stuff happen. But very important, you really want to try and use arguments in here because it prevents, Alpha is going to be much more disciplined about querying the database. The other is if down the road you go, oh, you know what? I don't want to use session variables anymore. I want that to actually come out of a table. Well, now all I have to do is go in here and say, you know what? Get it out of the table. Boom. This will now run properly. So you can repoint your arguments to different things and as long as they're going to the right place, but you don't have to actually then ever update your filter criteria and stuff like that. So it gives you some flexibility in terms of mixing and matching and then migrating over time because you have everything coming out of arguments and then you just have to go in and modify the arguments to say where's the information coming from. So that's one of the things that's kind of nice about arguments because you can switch them down the road. You can say, oh, I really want this argument to be this. Well, you can change the argument. I mean, you could even go in and say, well, I would now want to create an algorithm and use XBasic to generate what that argument is for this particular
Hmm.
grid. And the actual query is the same and doesn't have to change. So you'll have fewer problems with the query itself.
Cool. Okay, so arguments, session variables, these were all server-side things. We have a question now. Is it possible to grab an argument using JavaScript? Or at least
Good point. That's a great one because yeah. Now remember, this is kind of oriented around server-side application, meaning that this is for online. Because guess what? When this loads up, when it sees this, guess where it's going to do? It's going to call the database and get that information out for the current user. So, and there's some optimizations that go on there, but it's sort of a built-in assumption that this is being run online and that it has access to the back end. But
So
let's go ahead and look at
here's an example, sort of how I can imagine that would be the case. Let's say that you had logged in to a website, and at the top of the page, you wanted it to say, using JavaScript, hello, argument name, welcome back. Your last session was, and then maybe look at a table or something like that.
Yeah, now what you could do in server-side events here is when you initialize this, actually UXs are probably where you do more of that stuff, but when we
Mhm.
initialize this, you can always go like this. You can actually do e.javascript is equal to, and then put JavaScript here. So for instance, let's say city name, I could go in here and I could build this up and I could say var city name is equal to, and then plus city name, which could be coming from that argument.
Okay.
So what's going to happen is when this runs, it's going to go ahead and also emit this JavaScript. And in that JavaScript, I could set local variables. They could either be vars or they could be like local storage variables, etc. So you could manually create that JavaScript for or sort of those local. And now when it's running on there, these things are available. And again, it happens when you go through this here. So you can kind of create your own, like roll your own, like I'm going to put some local arguments, and then that JavaScript is available when it's on that browser because it kind of got it loaded when the grid did or when the UX did at that point in time.
So you'd use some sort of server-side event, and in the server-side event, you'd use e.javascript and set the JavaScript equal to the code that you needed to set your local JavaScript variables equal to whatever's in your arguments. Is that sort of the...
Yep. You'll notice I'm building basically a command, a JavaScript command that says load the var city name with this. And you have to be perfect. So like you may want to have to do this. And that, in fact, you probably have to do this. So you're kind of...
Oh, hang on a second. I think someone's come up with a slightly better answer than we...
I'm all for better answers.
Take a peek here, and I know only you can see this, Dion, because you have the power, but take a look in the questions window. There is a dialog.object.argument value argument name. We have actually thought this through for you. To the person who posted this.
Okay, James. I'm looking in the chat. It's not in the chat window.
Oh, sorry, questions window. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'm actually going to paste that.
There we are. Oh, cool.
So 2 ways to do it, and it looks like here's an easy, super easy way. Yeah.
This is just the commands that are available.
Yep,
yep, I see. So I guess what Alpha does is it already does this.
You already know how to handle that. Yeah.
Oh, cool. My guess is Alpha already does this. It says if there's any, if there are any arguments on this UX, then it puts there. Now I'm interested in that this set argument. I bet what happened. My question on the set argument value is, does it refresh? I'm not sure how that works. I understand this. This is going to be basically what it does is it loads all those arguments and then sends it down with the data to the web browser. So then now it's available. But I'm not sure how the set argument value would work. So wait, actually, let's find out here. Let's go ahead.
Sarah has pasted that right into the chat window if you want to click on the thing. Also, we want to thank Jay Talbot very much for pointing out the answer to today's question.
Okay. On the client side, very, very important, everybody. It allows you to set the value of an argument on the client side. After an argument has been, then when the argument will have the new value when the server code is executed. Oh, so I guess you can set it, and then when it does the next AJAX callback of any kind, then the server code will have that new argument value. Very cool, very neat. So obviously, I wonder if you set up your argument actually, let me go back to my query, go to my arguments. I wonder if you set your argument to get the value from the current logged in user, that I wonder if that overrides that. That would be kind of a nuance, you know. Does it always get it from the table whenever it's on the server side, or if I override that argument from then on? So, you know, use it with caution, but you can, yeah, that's cool. Thanks for bringing that up to date. Or where's that showing that to us? Cancel here.
Excellent. Looking through these other questions. Someone pointed out that it would be cool if you could define the source of an argument as a value from a field in a grid or UX. That could actually be pretty handy. I could see that.
Oh, I see. Interesting.
Or from any control, really, on a layout.
Now, just to let you know, is that you can, in Alpha, you can use code to set that argument valuable. So let me see where it is here. Where is it here? You can also set the value. So what you can do here, let me grab this out here. Let me put it up here so it's a little more visible. I know this is really crazy, but you can say set the argument to a certain piece of data. So if you write this in here or in an XBasic callback, then it's going to update that argument for you. So you could manually do that by doing it in XBasic to set those arguments up when it goes from there. And it showed here, you could actually just have this run on the client side in Action JavaScript or in JavaScript, and that would do the same thing, because the next time there's an AJAX callback, it's going to update the argument on the server side. So you got to be a little careful. You're starting to play stuff on the client, the server side, make sure things aren't stepping on each other. So definitely test it for real. But there's a couple different ways you can handle it, either through straight XBasic in like an XBasic function, callback function. You could set that argument here, or you can do this on the client side, and then Alpha, I guess, automatically generates this for you and does that. Excuse me.
Awesome. Here's a person who wrote it and said that they're using the old technique where they use MySQL for their security table.
Oh, yes.
And the MySQL table now has tens of thousands of users. Sounds like a pretty big app. Can the new security table handle that many users?
Oh, yeah, for sure. User information is just another MySQL table or SQL Server table. You could have millions of rows in there. It's really your database is what's going to dictate its speed and its capabilities. And since, by the way, user information, you'll notice that it is indexed. You'll see here it's got an index little for key. The lookup of this data is like instantaneous. It's extremely fast. So yeah, you should have no troubles with that kind of numbers in terms of in your database. You'll have your, like, let me, let's see, where's another one here? There it is. Okay, so here are the traditional tables here: users, groups, members. And again, you never want to touch these tables. No. A lot of people a long time would take this table right here, and then they would add their own fields onto it. In fact, I believe this one has some modifications, which is a big bad no-no. And so you want to leave it and then put all of your changes in a separate table, because there's no guarantee this table may change in the future. If let's say we found a security vulnerability or something else, we may change this table and just say that's how it goes, and you don't want to be stuck. Plus, it's just good to, the other thing is that it makes it transportable from one application to another, is that you're not always updating the Alpha Web security tables. The other thing that's more importantly is now when you move on to IIS or Alpha Cloud, guess what? We're not hitting this table.
It doesn't even change those tables. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the real key. And then what will happen is when we do it, we take all this information and put it into a new set of tables that are managed by IIS or Alpha Cloud that you don't even see or can't even directly touch. I mean, you can see them if you open up on IIS, you can actually open it, but you can't really touch them. They're handled through, they're all modified through code. So these kind of things would not be available. So that's why put your stuff in a separate table. Now you can use this new technique to make it even easier. So
now we have a question unrelated. It came in early though, and it had to do with using MariaDB to save PDFs and saving them as in a blob field. And they were having some issues when they pulled them out of the blob field that looked like our functions were not able to turn them back into PDFs again. So I'm going to leave that for next time, but it looks like an interesting question, and it looked like something related to what you were working on before. So I think we'll
there's no reason why you can't store and retrieve files out of as blob information. It's just mainly you got to make sure you put the right extension on it, so when it downloads, it actually downloads it as a PDF or a PNG or JPEG or whatever. But it's just a set of data there. The other question is, it's okay to leave, you can put stuff in the database, but you can also store them as separate files and just put file references in your database and manage it that way. And then your database kind of stays small and is really just about metadata. And then you can use that. Now, an important reason to think about doing that is that we're now in a, cloud world. And Alpha in particular has been working a lot in terms of making it easy to store those files in Amazon S3. And you get a couple really cool benefits. One, Amazon S3 is dirt cheap. You can put ungodly amount of stuff on there. It's also up and running all the time. They take care of making sure everything runs. But more importantly is when you're doing the file upload and download, you're not actually going to the Alpha server. it's actually happening between the browser and Amazon S3. So it actually takes off load off of your alpha server, because your server's not sitting there just moving digital data back and forth between a browser and a disk, which is what Amazon S3 does. And the other thing that's cool about Amazon S3 is that you can go into Amazon S3 and enable things like versioning. So for instance, it will automatically, if you overwrite a file, it'll actually save a copy of that for you. And that's all done on Amazon S3. You don't even have to think about it. So there's all these cool little DevOps, other things that kind of come with that, that's available when you start using external file storage and cloud-based storage. And notice we support both Azure and Amazon S3, although we tend to do more on S3, but both are supported on that. But definitely something you want to look at, that, you can store the data in your database, but, why not just store it as a file on a server and just be able to download it directly from there? So keep that in mind. But we'll cover that. We'll go over that and do a demonstration of that.
That makes sense. Well, we have run out of time.
All right.
So we will have Dion back here a week from Thursday. Next week, though, stay tuned for a very cool special presentation by Bezir Yazbek, who will be showing off applications that he has built and a few other really very cool techniques. His stuff is always worth watching, so I hope to see you then. Thank you very much, Dion, for presenting. Thanks
Thank you.
everyone who asked questions and who attended. Look forward to seeing you all next week. Take care and goodbye.